Welcome to episode 7 of Memorable Marketing by Media Group. Today we got a very special episode, and I feel like I say that every time, but we really do. Today we're interviewing Robbin, who is the affiliate and SEO lead at Saxo Bank. And we will talk about affiliate, but we certainly will talk a lot about SEO. And we're going very, very deep on where we are and where we're going. So if you want to learn more about SEO, this is a great topic, great episode. And Robbin is really, really knowledgeable and very shareable with his time and his energy. And so please listen to this episode. It's absolutely amazing.
You can't afford to forgo the user experience.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Memorable Marketing by Media Group. Today, we got a very special for you. We got Robbin, who is the SEO lead and affiliate for Saxo Bank. And we're going to talk a lot about SEO today. So welcome on board, Robbin. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Thomas. It's great to be here. I'm doing well. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Let's talk a little bit. I want to get to the whole part, of course, about Saxo Bank and the role there. But let's talk about how you, as a Dutch person, ended up in Copenhagen, which is my hometown, and how you ended up at Saxo Bank. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from the Netherlands, as you mentioned, from Amsterdam. So to a long story short, I practically moved to Denmark for the job at Saxo Bank, and that was October 2018. So over 2.5 years ago.
Okay. And how are you finding your time in Copenhagen, Denmark, and working at Saxo Bank? How's that changed? Is it different from Holland, or is it similar? What do you think?
I would say a little bit of both, and both in the good way. So it's similar because, of course, first of all, bike nation, right? Everyone rides a bike, loving that, continuing the healthy traditions. But on top of that, the piece that people here have, which might sound a bit profound, but if you really want to boil it down to something, it's the keep to yourself and kind of privacy level and respect that people have in general, the trust in the society that I think the Netherlands had about 20 years ago, which kind of sadly faded away over time, which still speaks to me a lot.
That's good to hear. Also, I'm going to leave it there.
No, fair enough. I guess then on the working side of things, right? So for work, quite similar. I think there's a very healthy work-life balance in Denmark. I think this is almost preached commonly by people. But I can really find myself in that as well. So, I mean, you work hard and you work overtime when needed, but there's no one who's going to slap you on the wrist if you leave early or late, according to your own schedule, especially now with Corona, of course, with working from home. And again, the trust involved, there's enough freedom to do your job well to your own goals and needs. But there's also enough guidance for managers to help you along that path.
That makes total sense. I think there's a Danish word expression for it called frihed under ansvar, and I'm not sure how good your Danish is, but it basically means freedom under responsibility, that you are free to do your things, but you have responsibilities, and we leave it up to you to figure it out. Of course, you can come and ask for help at any time, and it's just, I don't know if it's a Danish thing, but I like that approach. You go and learn instead of being micromanaged all the time. So for those people who don't know what Saxo Bank is, can you give people an overview from your perspective, what Saxo Bank is?
Absolutely. I guess we should start with the basics of just defining it. So Saxo Bank is, although this is a common misconception, actually not a bank. It is regulated by the financial authorities, and yes, it's a place where you can invest and trade. Basically, we provide that to our clients, but it's not a traditional bank in the sense of holding an account or having a credit card. So in essence, you can trade and invest with us as an account. When we think about what we're trying to achieve and what Saxo is really about, then we've actually recently had a change in our strategic approach and what we want as a mission and vision of a company. So we went from wanting to democratize trading, which in essence is still, of course, one of our core values, but we went to a more broader approach, which is to inform and educate investors and traders to make better and informed trading decisions. So what that comes down to is whenever you're ready or thinking about placing an investment, a trade, we want you to be educated to the best level you can in order to decide if you want to do that or not. So instead of taking the approach of we are here for you if you want to, we are saying we're here for you, but do you want to? And that's not to say that the answer is no, but the answer could be a different stock. It could be a different instrument or approach that you've been thinking about. It could be risk management. All these aspects are becoming increasingly important in this market, especially for individual people just stepping in. And again, if the experience is lacking, then of course you can tell them, hey, you are allowed to trade GME or AMC stock with us, right? Because effectively that's what they think they want to do. And maybe that is what they want to do, and that's fair. But then we were trying to make sure that we inform them as best as we can on risk management, on portfolio diversification, all of these aspects, to really see if that's the best fit for them.
These young people coming in, or first-time investors coming in, they're coming in because on Reddit they're following somebody who says we're going to the moon with AMC or BlackBerry or whatever the topic is. But it's turning into a movement, and they beat Wall Street at its game a couple of times. That's been unheard of. Yeah, whether they should be regulated, that's a whole different political discussion. But it's still impressive. Yes,
it definitely is. It definitely is.
Can you tell a little bit more about, besides what you do, can you tell a little bit about background about Saxo Bank and how many employees you are and what you do besides trading? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bank started over 25 years ago now. And of course, it didn't start as a bank. It started as a relatively small company with Kim Fournay and a few others in one room, traditional Wall Street view of them just calling buy, sell, buy kind of thing, where a client would get on the phone, I want to buy X amount for this. And then they would immediately transfer to the exchange and make their trades. So of course, it started off relatively small then, and this was all done right here in Denmark. So it's a Danish origin bank, and over time that grew relatively quickly. So went from 5 people to, of course, 10, and then before you knew it, they were over 100. At which point they decided to think bigger, and in that sense, that meant globally. So of course, nowadays you don't necessarily need physical offices anymore. Even though we do have them. But back then, of course, that was the way to get into new markets. So it grew from their Danish office to what we now have, which is more than 15 offices worldwide, where in any region that you can think of, we're present, excluding the US and Canada. But what happened was the growth and the interest of the company exploded because of the simple fact that we were trying to, or they were trying to, I shouldn't say we, I wasn't there back then, but to execute on the needs of the clients, of course. And this was done in such a localized way, again, in Denmark. So you can imagine back then, all the other larger firms or companies that were doing this were either also slowly growing and small, or they were already global, meaning they lacked that personal local touch. And of course, Denmark speaking Danish, which is very specific to Denmark, which makes sense, people would have rather been served in their native language. So there were a lot of advantages and points that made it happen. But growing over time, the point really became, the emphasis became on trying to connect clients to the exchanges in any way that they saw possible, as long as it's compliant. So what we offer today is still, as I said, mostly the trading and investment experience, but we do that within different ways. So first of all, we want to be able, like I said, to connect all the exchanges. So any instrument that someone might be interested in, we try to offer. And I'm saying try because it has to be compliant as well. But if it is, then you can see that there's quite an extensive list. I believe for over 40,000 instruments that have been offered to clients, from stocks to options, where they could, of course, execute on. And this is one of our main points that we're really trying to get across is that, okay, we might not be the cheapest. We're not getting into a $0 commission, let's say, fight with some of the other brokers. But what we're trying to do is just offer what we can at affordable and fair prices. And of course, that differs per office, but it comes down to whatever it is you prefer, we try to offer. So if you want us to manage your money, then we have an asset management solution for you. If you want to invest some stocks yourself, you can do that through our Saxo Investor platform. If you would try to, if you are a trader, either beginner or advanced, you can use our Go platform for that. If you are really advanced, then we have our Pro solution for you that might cater to your more personal needs on the platform, how it should look and feel. So with that, we're really taking a very broad approach to the market and the audience, which has become increasingly important over the years, not just because of Wall Street bets, not just because of the Corona crash and the FOMO of everyone jumping in, but also because it has already been evident that the last 5 or 10 years, investors as a segment has been growing rapidly, whereas traders has been slowly declining. Now, this is mainly for 2 reasons. First of all, is that investing is, of course, much safer, more consistent. So people are having a lower barrier of entry. In general, the market's saying that so many X percentage of clients lose money. And that's not because they make one wrong trade, but because consistently you need to be on your toes and execute so many orders that odds are against you, quite literally. So it's better to do some fundamental analysis to understand what it is you're trading or investing into, and what is your goal. And again, that comes back to what we're trying to offer with the educational side of things as well. To give you an example there, we have what we call our Saxo Strats team. They're experts that basically talk movements in the market. So they have their daily, weekly, and sometimes monthly events and calls where they go through any changes in the market and what that might mean for the rest of the market. So obviously then you're talking macro and microeconomics instead of just, stock X went up by 50%, right? Because that's nice, but should you then get in, right? Maybe the bump was up, maybe it will go higher. But for that, you need to understand the market. And of course, again, with Wall Street bets, separate example. But in general, that fundamental analysis still holds true. If you think about what Saxo really tries to do, boil it down to the education of clients, the widest offering they can to have you basically have a one-stop shop, if you want to call it, for trading and investing, and understanding your future growth and plans with potential products that are currently in existence, as well as that will likely be coming into the future.
In terms of your role at Saxo Bank, what is it that you do, and what do you do on a daily basis, and how do you combine affiliate with SEO, and what is affiliate, and can you explain more about SEO?
Yes, good question. I actually get this a lot, obviously from people that are not that much into marketing, which is fair. They're all very heavy terms in the industry. And secondly, because it's an odd combination of the two, some people might argue. But let's start from the beginning. So when I joined for the affiliation side of things. So in short, affiliation, although defined differently by different companies, within Saxo, it means our partnerships with others. And that, of course, is, again, a very broad, defined topic. So we try to narrow it down to saying partnerships with websites that are talking about or promoting the financial industry in one way, shape, or form. And then in general, we would consider partnering up with them if they have either a comparison element to that. So they might be speaking about our competitors, and then we would, of course, like to be there as well. Or if there is a good fit in the content they write. So the 3 types of websites that we usually partner up with, just to put it simply, would be a comparison website, as mentioned, a larger website that covers a lot of marketing news, or a smaller type website that could be a blogger. that is talking very specifically about maybe a niche in the financial industry. And within these three types, the results are usually the same. We would evaluate, of course, on an ongoing basis how we're doing together, and reach an agreement that works for both ways, where they could promote us in different ways, and we, of course, get clients from them, and that, of course, means they get remunerated in a certain way. So that is the affiliation part in short. Of course, some other companies might include some display elements as well, such as banners. We decided to keep that separate. So we have a separate display team, and affiliation is seen as a separate entity, if you will. And then over time, of course, growing that, it became evident that when you're working with a lot of affiliation partners, they have to get their traffic from somewhere, right? So if you think about what is their origin, well, it is SEO, it is PPC, right? So if you think back on where do they get their traffic, then it becomes quite logical to start considering, could we either complement each other here? Could we avoid cannibalization of our traffic, which is, of course, very important? Or do we want to compete with each other? So the questions there are, of course, never as black and white when you ask them. But the answer could be, yes, we do want to compete together with this affiliate, because maybe then we own the top 5 on Google. Or maybe we want to avoid competing because we might be paying for traffic we could have gotten organically. Or maybe we want to set specific rules on their PPC activities so they don't bid on our brand. These kind of efforts kind of blend together after a while, and it shows that the more you understand of different marketing channels before you talk to potential partners, the better you can understand where they're getting the traffic and see your own potential opportunities and threats as a company. So that really helped with my previous knowledge on SEO, but it also made me just, again, rekindle that flame of interest in SEO. So after a while, I then got the opportunity to take the SEO side as well, which I did. And here to explain very briefly what SEO is, if you might not know. In my own words, and this is very subjective, it is basically trying to please Google. So of course, it's not just about Google, but as Jeff Bezos put very nicely, Google is like a mountain. You can climb the mountain, but you can't move it. So you have to work with it. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's always a challenge when, as an SEO person, you're trying to please Google, but at the same time knowing that this is all about your users, right? So you can't afford to forgo the user experience because you want to get the users and you need to keep them. But you also need Google to understand what your website is about before you get the users. So it's a dilemma, and that is exactly the interest and fun part of working in SEO, or one of anyway, which is that trade-off between where do you put on the UX hat and where do you put on the Google first hat, and where do they intertwine? And then on top of that, once you think you've figured it out, what is new in Google's eyes because of all the updates coming out, all the things we don't know about and probably never will know, but have to guess on.
The moving goalpost, because it keeps being updated and it keeps being adapted. So
exactly.
We'll never get there, but it's a mountain.
Exactly.
Keep walking.
Exactly. Yes. And that is in essence the fun of the job, to be honest. Of course, there's a lot to do and you're never done. And you might have to go back to the basics and look at very specific things like, okay, how many 404s did we got this month? I mean, of course, it's not all fun and thinking and being creative. Even though this is called memorable marketing, some of the things you have to do are not as memorable. But they're the stepping stones, right? They're the pillars, the foundation on which you build to get there. And that is in a nutshell what I would call SEO.
Just going back to what you were saying before, so there is a dynamic between the affiliates, because of course, if you do affiliate with somebody on a website out there, they will link to you, which of course helps with having links to your website. And if it's a respected website, it will of course help with your ranking in terms of the Google mountain. And then there is the SEO on its own side. So let's talk a little bit more about the SEO. So what do you do on a daily basis? How do you work to improve SEO, and how do you see SEO has changed in that period you've been at Saxo Bank? There's many questions packed into one. I hope you'd like to.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Let's start with the first one. So, what do I do on a daily basis? So sometimes it's as simple as sending the most recent 404 list to the web team. Of course, that's not the only thing, right? So it's a lot of analysis, a lot of understanding currently the landscape as well as where it's going. And how you would do that is breaking down SEO in its fundamental parts. So one of them is, of course, the technical side. So you want your website to be as healthy as you can, as we call it. So the website health literally translates into how many technical issues do you have versus how much could you add as kind of a translation to Google to help it understands what your website is about. So that could come in the form of a structured data set or a schema where, for example, you try to mark up, as we call that, your FAQs, so that Google understands, okay, this is a question and an answer. I could actually take that part and put it on Google without people having to go to the website. Now, there's, of course, advantages there, especially on the memorable marketing part of things, because that could relate directly to branding. So then how do you go about that? Well, spitting all these words are cool, but then, okay, schema, what is it? How do you implement it, right? So I would do the research. What do we need to basically write about in technical terms on the website? And then, because I do a lot of these technical analysis, but I don't personally do the implementation, I would get our IT guys involved to start creating the HTML or the actual code, and then try to publish that on the website. And then, of course, review and see if it has worked. So these are again, part of the efforts as well on the technical side. Then, of course, there is the content side, and that is not to mention one of the very big items. We tend to think about websites and pages going live as relevant for users. And that usually is true. However, how do users find these pages, right? Usually through two different ways. Either they came to the website in one way, shape, or form and started navigating around. That is internal linking, which we have control over. Or they came from Google, most likely. And again, if they came from Google, then the question remains, how do you rank on Google? How do you make sure that they come to you instead of someone else? So that translates back into the content itself. So is it optimized? And when we say optimized, we mean, is it translatable enough? So for us, for example, we recently launched crypto in several markets, crypto as ETNs and as Forex. So if someone searches for crypto FX, how do we make sure that without a brand in the query, they still see us over whatever competitor, right? And again, that comes down to understanding how the copy needs to be optimized, whether or not we're catering to the intent users have. Intent usually meaning opening an account. Well, luckily they can do that with us, so that helps. But if they're interested and they want to know more, then again, it comes down to the educational side of things. So you have to write a how-to, or you have to make sure that that you're not just catering to one potential intent of the keyword, because then you might not win over others. And again, now I'm taking very much a SEO first approach. Of course, it's still about the user, and they should have the best experience. But I usually translate that into what Google thinks, and for example, a click-through rate or a avoidance of bounce rate to make it very analytical. But again, it is still about the user in the end. So rewriting content, suggesting keywords, synonyms would be a daily thing for me as well, of course. And then thirdly and lastly is the offsite element. And you hinted towards this already with the affiliation a bit of linking back to us. Of course, when affiliates do it, there's usually a tracking code involved, so it's not as natural. So it doesn't have the same value usually. But when we think about offsite, it's really the interconnectiveness of your website to the entire web out there, right? And of course, there's going to be some links here and there organically, and especially when people are interested or pick you up on news, on media, that's of course also indirectly a PR effort, even though you don't slap KPIs on PR on getting links, because that's effectively not what you're trying to do. It's a byproduct. But in the grand scheme of things, you do want to get as much links as possible from websites, from users in general. This is partly an organic approach and partly something that that you have to find websites for, and sometimes reach out. Hey, website X, we are relevant. We just did this. What about a link, right? Maybe not in those terms, but it's about creating those collaborations with others and verifying together that you are a trusted source. Think about Saxo Bank in Denmark and Børsen, for example. There's a collaboration going on there. There's a lot of back and forth on the brands, and they are not interchangeable, obviously, but there's a lot of added value of us collaborating. And yes, there will be links involved, and yes, there will be references, and and all of that together builds to that connectiveness. So taking those three pillars, and of course, I'm just scratching the surface here. There is many aspects to all of them, but that is really still my day-to-day job when we're talking SEO.
Okay. And you mentioned something before. I just want to see if I can catch up on that, because when you run a PPC and you run a Facebook campaign or a Google Ads campaign, you throw some money after it, you can test it right away. As soon as you got 1,000 users, 10,000 users, you can test it. How do you test SEO if it's working? I mean, what parameters do you have? Because it's normally a long, slow burn effect, right? It takes a while for it to pick up. So how do you test that? How do you test if you're on the right track? I'm just curious.
Oh, it's a very good question, and I think this is one that most SEO managers are challenged with, to be honest. That purely because of what you mentioned, the long-term effect that you, by lack of better words, kind of have to sit around and wait for with SEO, compared to PPC, where from day one you know exactly how many clicks you got, users, and a week later you know how many conversions you've gotten, right? So what it comes down to is twofold, actually. It's, first of all, you can make a case for SEO before you even do anything, which is usually through PPC. So if you do have a landing page ready, or if you do have a certain page that's relevant enough, you can target certain keywords and test on PPC the amount of clicks you get through and the average conversion rates on a specific set of keywords which you were thinking of using on the organic side. Of course, it's not going to be a one-on-one, but it's going to show you the initial volume that you might be getting, and you have an estimate of the conversion rate. Now, what you can do with that is you can then factor in your delay on SEO before you expect to start ranking, and your average position that you believe is feasible to reach. So this is, of course, some assumptions, but you can say in 2 months' time, I believe we could be, let's say, position 8 on Google for 5 of these keywords. That should relate back to X percentage in traffic, as I know from position 8. Of course, 8 as an example wouldn't give you much. You usually have to be in top 5, but it's just for exemplary purposes. Then when you know the volume you get, you can use that average conversion rate that you've been seeing on PPC. Again, only if you're using the same keywords. And usually you want to exclude branding because that's obviously going to shift your data set. But then you should know the amount of live leads, for example, in our case, that we could get in. A live lead being someone that opened their account or started the process. If we know those amount of people, we have on our back end a machine learning system that basically says this is what that client will be most likely worth for you in the next 3 months. So we can use that value on our side to start calculating our return on asset spent. And this now gets really, really far-fetched, but that's how we do it actually, is that we would know the return in percentage. So let's say 200%, it could be that means, break even in 6 months or earlier. We will know that before we even start an SEO practice. And that really, really helps to sell it internally, but mostly just manage expectations, right? Because you don't want someone knocking on your door after 3 weeks saying, this doesn't work, shut it down. Yeah, with that being said, that's usually how we do it. And if we don't have that data available on PPC, or we don't have the pages yet, then it's about taking the average volume that we know through, for example, Keyword Planner in PPC, which should be the organic monthly volume for certain keywords, and then using our average conversion rate for a certain market on organic with the average value per lead that we know in that market to get the same calculations. So we always make cases on ROAS based, and that is very simply a yay or nay kind of level, where you get green light or you find the next opportunity, really. And of course, once you have the green light, it's not just about doing that one case, but it's about, before even implementing it, thinking about the scalability implications. So how many markets could we scale this to if it is a success? What is that exact success metric, so that once we hit it, we will scale? And what does that mean for localization and language? Which people should be involved? All of that is taken almost as early as possible, not at the concept stage, but definitely at the stage just before success is reached, to ensure you have some good timelines set up and effort to continue with.
That makes sense. Over your time in working at Saxo Bank, have you gone from a strategy in the beginning, we're going to concentrate on these 10, 20 words to now keywords to now hundreds and thousands? Is that how, have you like mapped it out? Is that how you're thinking structurally, or you just focus on a key area, or what's the process involved with that, if I may ask?
I think it's pretty similar to what you just mentioned, actually. It started off as just focus on the core pages, of course, right? You always want to focus on what we call your money pages. So where do you know your conversions will be, and what can you do to improve those? So that's usually the quick wins. So for us, that is our product pages. So where we mention our stocks, ETFs, etc. Not the individual instruments, but just broadly saying you can trade or invest in stocks, right? So those pages for us were the key focus. All those pages, in essence, had about 5 keywords across, all our markets. I think the website cultures, as we call them, on markets, are above 50 now as well. So you can multiply that, of course, going onward. But that was our basis. We really wanted to nail those first. We've made incredible progress there. Of course, we're not number one for all these queries. Progress to a certain extent that we are seeing a return well above what we were projecting, which also means that, of course, you're never done again, right? You need to keep an eye on it, but that means you can move on to the next project. So yes, it definitely started off as that. Basis first, right? Nail that, then move on. At this point in time, we're doing project-based, which is, again, depending on whatever comes up. Either it's relevancy in the market, it's something that has been growing in volume. It could be a strategic decision from our end, something that we're going to launch in the future. Those, of course, come on more an ad hoc basis, usually. But then what we're also doing, and that is to cater to every single individual instrument out there. If you're able to do that with a page, then ironically, you probably call that the long tail, but ironically, it together, if you accumulate it, will have much more volume than the main page, right? People searching for stocks, of course, huge volume, but people searching for individual stocks, if you can accumulate all of those searches and have a page for every single one, then you are massively overarching that volume from just your general stock page. As I mentioned, we have to think about the individual instrument, then think about the exchanges it's listed on, which usually is multiple, the different languages, currencies, the website URL structure. There are so many variables here. It's very easy to actually make it work against you if you go live with something that you haven't thought about. So we're still in the process of mapping most of this out. But we're trying to reach this level because of the volume behind it and because of the way that people currently search. So if you know you want to trade a stock, then of course you should know where you can do this. If you want to know the price, why not show Saxo? Because in the end of the day, you want to have that brand repetition, which hopefully leads to memorable marketing. It's a process. We're definitely not there yet, but it's something we've been starting with a while ago, and is growing a bit more now. Which I guess if you want a near example, you could look to the likes of Nordnet, which is specifically for Denmark, but their stocks, they basically offer all of those on their website before login. So they've effectively taken their almost platform, if you will, and said, before a login, we want this to be accessible on the internet. And that was extremely smart, because not only were they the first ones to do that, they're also doing it in Danish. So they are the ones showing up because no one else is doing it, right? There's a few other websites that might be taking the same data from exchanges and showing it, but they can't cater to the same intent because they're not a broker, right? So this is what we're trying to get to those kind of levels of competition and growth in volume.
Very interesting and very exciting, actually. And yes, and catering to Danish, it's a very small market, what, 5.5 million people. But if you speak it, people will trust that side over another side, as you said. It caters to the language, to the region, to the browser, to the platform you're on. Absolutely. In your years at Saxo Bank, and also if you're going to go back to your university days, I mean, what has changed from your perspective of this mountain? Has it gotten taller? Has it gotten wider? Has it gotten harder to navigate? I mean, how's the topography of that mountain? Can you see a development there? What is your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think the mountain is as big as ever and probably just growing, because of Google, of course, trying to not only expand its services and improve what it's offering, but also making decisions that again we can move the mountain, right? So making decisions that we have effectively no impact on or no say in. And I think this is both good and bad, because of course it makes sense to not listen to everyone else and you're still a company, right? But I think what is challenging with this is that Google starts deciding on what we should know and what we shouldn't. And when it's talking about its own algorithm, fair enough, in their right to say that's ours, right? But when you're talking about findability on search, for example, Google decided to remove a lot of the volume in keywords that it shows you through Google Search Console, even through paid efforts as well, if they believe it's accredited to long tail and it's a huge amount of keywords that get you usually below X amount of impressions. Now, in essence, that sounds like kind of makes sense. You're filtering out, you're cleaning up the data set. But what they fail to have mentioned is that in a lot of the cases, and we see that in Saxo as well, in some of our specific pages, this long tail is sometimes 40 to 60% of the total impressions that you get on the page. So in essence, they're hiding how to perform. And that doesn't really add value to any SEO manager, because how are you supposed to do your job and please Google when Google doesn't tell you how to be pleased, right? And we know this from the algorithm, and again, we have to take that by its face value. But when you do the same with reporting, with optimizations, you are starting to truly limit what SEO managers can do. So that part, as a, let's call it movement almost, that does scare me, because it's not going to impact our jobs as to say we're not needed anymore, but it's taking away a lot of the opportunities, potentially even threats that we might have otherwise foreseen before they occur. So that in its own is I think quite challenging. Then on the other hand, you have all these updates that Google comes out with I think are relevant and interesting, especially the one on more authoritative websites, and it's more about being recognized. Absolutely makes sense, right? Quality over quantity. All of those updates I agree with. But I'm also seeing a pretty big discrepancy between the launch of an update and what Google says it will do versus what it actually does. And what I mean there is, if you think about single keyword landing pages, I mean, historical wise, everyone was doing this. It was the best thing you could do. You mash out the same content over and over, but you change some keywords and you paraphrase the page, right? This was a common effort that everyone did, and it worked. Funnily enough, years ago when Google started saying we're moving away from this, this is no longer going to get any recognition whatsoever. Multiple keywords should be on the page. You're not going to get away with creating so many pages for just one keyword. I still thought it would be fun to run an experience. So I still did the same thing for a few keywords. And back then I was working for a revenue engineer, so it was a different vertical, different effort. But what I found out is that those pages were still getting very good rankings. Even much so, they oftentimes beat other competitors that were doing the multiple keyword strategy. So I feel like Google is not necessarily practicing what they're preaching. They will, of course, in the end, but they have a very large catch-up time, in essence. So from the moment they start saying this is now important, I start taking it with a grain of salt. I know it's important and I should work towards it, but I probably have plus 2 years, if not more, to change it before the opportunity or threat hits you. And maybe they do that on purpose to give you a heads up, but then be transparent about it, right? And say this will become more important, and don't say this is important from this update that comes out now.
It's a free product they're offering, and there's no price, and you're not buying it, and yep, it's they're in charge.
Take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it. Yes,
you don't have to climb the mountain.
Stay down there. Stay in the valley. Stay in the valley where it's sunny. It's cold and windy up here.
Exactly. And another thing, I think you nailed it there by saying, it's not a service you're paying for, right? Because in the same logic, they of course have a huge stake in trying to get you to either substitute or test using the paid route, right? If they can get you to do more PPC because you're not exactly sure what to do on the organic side of things, who stands to gain? Well, of course, Google wants more, right? So that's exactly another valid point that they're probably using. And I'm saying probably because, of course, I don't know and I don't want to speak ill of Google, but I don't otherwise see why they would do this. Is just another way to make more money, or at least the same amount of money in the immediate time frame. Yeah.
Because PPC, you pay up front, you put a credit card in, and you just start paying, and you get instant results. Whereas SEO, as we talked about, does take longer. It will work and probably will be cheaper in the long run compared to PPC, but it takes a while to catch up for the whole thing.
Absolutely. Even if you've done SEO and you might get to top 5, of course, over time, depending on the type of content, interest of users can change, intent can change, and especially if the content is timely, at some point it will become either less relevant or irrelevant. So of course PPC is the easier and safer option, but it's also the more expensive one.
All right, so that's exactly true. So you mentioned before, you'd said, okay, this latest update used to be going wide. Now it's more about authority. Is that where we're heading? That it's becoming more, I think the term is topical authority. It's more about building a deeper understanding for the user, and therefore it's, as you said before, it's more quality content side, and we'll rate that higher as opposed to just somebody who's writing a blog post about something. Is that where you're seeing it's heading?
I do believe so. I think topical relevance in itself simply means try to cater to whatever the user wants to know, right? So if we're talking Forex, for example, in our business, that means we don't only have to show you that you can trade it with us. We have to show you what is it, how do you trade it, what to take into account, are there any strategies, what is the risk, what is the upside, trying to cater to all these different interests of users and questions that they might have. Because of course, as we know, Google loves questions, right? Especially if they have an answer. So it's doing all of that and more, and then being verified by other websites. So yes, that authority comes in, and that is again because you're catering to the full range. So people, if you think about it, it's counterintuitive for Google because you're saying be the one-stop shop in all these answers. so that the user doesn't have to Google again, which is weird because, of course, Google wants people to Google. But at the same time, at least they're catering to their user and avoiding them having to go to 10 different websites for effectively the same topic, right? Unless they want to fact check the other website, they can say the same, they can see the same information or relatively the same information on the same source. On top of that, I think it's also a development that was a response to the fake news efforts. So Google obviously has a very big challenge ahead of itself, and we still see this in Google News and in other elements where fake news does sneak through. Even through the Google News filter, sometimes there is some fake news or there's information that is partly accurate or bold claim is being made. This is, of course, not what Google wants in the end. And I think by working towards that topical authority, it will also help Google understand not only on news, but in general, who to basically rank and give some credit to above these fake news websites. Because, of course, you can really put in a lot of money and effort to create a website that caters to the entire financial news spectrum and then have a fake news article come out. Of course, you can do that. But right now, most of what comes out is these websites that have been hastily created, that have 2 pages, that have 200 ads on the same page. So I think Google also wants to counteract that whole movement by putting even more emphasis on content quality and recognition and authority by others.
That's very interesting you say that, because that's really one of my hopes when internet came along. That was that promise of we're going to have to hear the truth. We're going to hear what's right and what's wrong. And I know we're supposed to talk SEO, and it's very hard not to when we look at what's happening in America and stuff like that. And I'll try and stay on topic. But that goes back to what you were saying before, because what you're saying, you guys changed at Saxo Bank, changed the strategy perspective. How can we help our customers more? So by you having that strategic system, whether that was influenced by Google or not, makes sense, because we want to educate our buyers. Sure, you can buy the MC stock or the BlackBerry, whatever Wall Street Bets latest thing is on Reddit. But we can also educate you. You can become better. You can be a more savvy investor, and you can learn what everyone else has learned who has done this for a long time. We want to teach you that. And because you teach you that, you hopefully get more loyal customers. They're going to like you more. And then also it helps with SEO, because Google says, now these guys are topical authority. These guys know what they're talking about because they're spending all this time educating their users. So it fits in that perspective. That's very impressive. I mean,
absolutely. And I think then, just as an additional side note, thinking from just the business perspective, like you mentioned, of course, it's about having them become loyal and staying longer. So it's, of course, also churn avoidance, right? But on top of that, it is an increasingly competitive industry, right? And like I said before, the 5 to 0 commissions, the offerings everyone is throwing out, sometimes timely, it just makes that, and I think this is true for a lot of industries, which is why I'm making the comparison. It just makes for people being much more likely to switch. I think more and more of our generation are trying to push back on what we believe in or what we don't believe in. And because of that, and because of our short attention span, which is sadly something that with the generation is only getting shorter in my personal experience, and for myself as well included, it just leads to the next best thing, right? We all need to find the next thing. So in February this year and March, it was the drop in the market. So everyone wanted to get in, and everyone had FOMO because it was going back up. All right. A few months later, we suddenly have to push back to the hedge fund managers because Wall Street Bets, right? Why? Because again, our attention has already shifted. We're not thinking about the market anymore. We were into stocks. Nah, that's not interesting anymore. Oh, what's here? Oh, we have Wall Street Bets, or we have crypto. Both are high risk. Let's do it, right? So you move into the next thing, and the next thing, oh, Dogecoin, Shiba Inu. Oh no, now it's AMC again. So everyone is jumping all over the place, and they can't even keep track of it themselves anymore. And this, you have to see this as, if this is the new benchmark in the market, or at least for now, then you can only imagine what that means for clients' behavior and their potential to jump to the next broker, right? Because they could be using a broker for a month, and for whatever reason, either because they didn't make money, or because they've seen the platform enough, or because they get bored for whatever other reason, or a bad experience. I mean, it could be, of course, a multitude of things, but I think the external influences as well as their own focus has made it so that they're far more likely to be jumping around between brokers. Um, and again, you want to try to keep them. So what do you then do? Well, you need to up your game and experience in providing knowledge, but also in terms of introducing them to whatever other products you then have. Of course, as a business, again, your focus is always on trying to cross sell where relevant, because it makes you business. But for the client's perspective, especially now with a lot of this changing and churning, if people are getting into options or AMC stock, uh, you want to start cross-selling them into ETFs probably, or maybe into bonds, just to diversify their portfolio. Pick something that's a bit safer, at least less risky over time, that you can grow year on year on top of what they're already doing. Because if you get them to be in for the long run, of course, it's not a sure way of keeping them, but it's much more likely that you'll keep them, because now they're thinking years ahead. Whereas right now, people are thinking today and tomorrow, AMC to the moon, right? That doesn't help you. It doesn't help us as a business understanding how many of these people are going to be there next week, right? So you want to help themselves think about the future.
Exactly. All right. Where do you go for your information, Robbin? Where do you learn more stuff? Who do you look to find out what's happening in SEO, especially? Who do you look to, if I may ask?
That's a good question. I mean, of course, I'm a big fan of Neil, to be honest. Neil Patel is always a good guy to follow and listen to, at least from the main aspects of what he's saying. And what I mean with that is, I actually follow a lot of people, a lot of channels. I usually go for the same tools as well, the tools that I have used, the tools that I am using. Most of these have a different kind of blog or newsletter coming out. I follow all of these different aspects because even though they might have an angle on what serves their business best, so maybe, oh, you can now research more with this new feature, they're still going to explain, or most of the time, the reasons behind it, why you should do it, or what has changed in the market. So to be honest, by following as many as possible, which sounds counterproductive when you're pressed for time, but you still make a decision yourself on what you actually want to read, obviously, or view through if it's a video. But by following so many different offerings, you can almost filter out the bias, because if you know that 5 of these tools and 2 of the major influencers are talking about it, and you take away their subjective claims, because most of it's objective anyway. There might be some subjective things. Everyone has an agenda. That's fine. If you take that away, you're going to get the core elements, the core information, what you wanted and needed. If that's verified, again, right, I guess the authority part, content, that's verified by 5 or more sources, then I'm going to take that as a base to move forward. That information becomes my new opportunity or threat for the future. I know I didn't mention a lot of names or a lot of tools, but to be honest, that's because you could probably ask me, who aren't you following? It would be a shorter list. But I think that's exactly the key, right? I think too many people are finding 1 or 2 people that they personally relate to. And that's fine, because we all have that human bias of wanting to see someone and recognize what they're saying and see them as an idol or whatever. Fine. But try to put that aside when you're thinking factually. Right? Try to see, okay, what they just said, who else is saying it? You could literally simply Google one of the sentences or the core topic that they mentioned and see who else is doing it. I mean, we're SEO guys, for God's sake. We should know how to Google. And you will easily see if this is a thing that requires your attention or not. And even then we might get it wrong. I mean, look at voice search and how it was promised in 2023. 50-60% of users would use voice search, and it was going to be the new hottest topic and thing. And are people using voice search? Sure. Is it working correctly? Debatable. Is it 60% of searches globally? Oh no, not at all. Not at all. So it could be a hit and miss either way, but at least when more people are talking about it, you get the industry's latest instead of someone's agenda.
Robbin, we've been talking here for a while. It's been very interesting. I've certainly learned a lot. And I know you work with our SEO team in Copenhagen. Can you elaborate on what you work with them together and how they help you?
I mean, like you mentioned, it had been 17 years for Media Group Worldwide, so obviously I wasn't there for the bulk of that. When I did join and took over from the previous person that was in the SEO position, there was already some collaboration with Media Group Worldwide, but I think we had the advantage of the market growing as well as the internal education on the importance of SEO that really helped take that partnership to the next level. And what I mean with that is both scaling in budget and efforts. So we started off thinking about the connectiveness of websites and any new possible publishment of pages, for example. But then I think nowadays we're talking much more specific to project level, as well as more zoomed out strategically. So they're a great help when it comes to analyzing the market, especially on the competitor level. So if we know in a specific niche we want to beat X, Y, Z, how do we do this? And of course, the answer could be content or linkability or technical sites. But then on top of that, the answer is justified by saying this is what competitors are doing, so at least match that or go above. And of course, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to check what competitors are doing, but it is a very timely task. And you need to be at least in the industry itself to do it properly. And I think this is really where Media Group Worldwide shines for us, because first of all, they understand the industry. And second of all, these are tasks that they do more continuously, and they don't mind, zooming out and looking at the competitor landscape, because of course that's one of the main tasks that we are in collaboration with them for. So that means that we save time on our end on that aspect by being able to work on other threats or opportunities, implementation wise as well, whereas they are providing us with basically next in line, without us having to have the opportunity cost of choosing where to put our efforts. So that in itself is already great. And then I think we've made some progress on content writing as well, together with the Media Group Worldwide. Of course, we have our own content writers, but they're very busy with making sure content is on brand, that we are rewriting consistently, especially when it comes to pricing and other updates. So that means you can lose track of new content sometimes. So that support is very well received. And then, of course, on the UX level, we started some practices thinking about the experience of the user between pages, especially when it's new pages being launched. So again, of course, we have our own UX team, and they're focusing on existing pages and connectiveness between them. But when new pages come in, especially if it's a new project that we haven't necessarily done before, then of course there's more questions than answers. So it's always good to then get an additional input on how they might live on the totality of the website, as well as communicate between each other when the new pages come in, instead of having to do it just before they go live. And with any good company, when you are stretched for time or have limited resources internally, you usually look outward. And for us, we've had a very happy outward relationship with Media Group Worldwide.
That sounds absolutely awesome. So these articles they help write with, is that how to build a topical authority? Is that the direction you guys are going in?
Yes. So to give two examples for this, one is indeed Topical Authority of one of our products in a specific market that we are trying to beat certain competitors with. I won't mention too much just in case they're listening. And the second one is indeed on the instrument pages as well, in terms of having bulk content that is still unique and catered to what people are searching for. Because of course, the trade-off in SEO as well, which I guess we haven't touched on, but I'll keep it very brief, is also the uniqueness of content versus templating your website. So of course, everyone wants to have a template, and a template in look and feel, sign me up. But when you're talking about templating content, of course, you have to be very careful that you're not getting into the duplicate content level or getting partly duplicate content, because regardless of one or the other, it won't add value to Google nor the user. So we've been working on individual FAQs, individual company content and descriptions that are, of course, factually correct, unique enough because they're rewritten, and cater to what people are searching for right now, to make sure that they're getting what they're searching for, basically, and not just to cater to one keyword, but basically, what are the questions people are searching for? What do we know about the intent behind it that they want to do?
That sounds good. Thank you, Robbin. This has been a very good and long talk. Thank you so much.
I mean, I want to thank you, of course, and Zane as well, the producer, for making this happen. I'm very glad to have been asked to participate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robbin, for being on Memorable Marketing. It was an absolute pleasure having you here. We really appreciate it. If you want to find out how you can work with us in my media group, stay tuned, and I'll talk about this after this. And Robbin, I wish you a great day, and hopefully we'll see each other in the same city at some point.
Thank you. You too.
So as always, if you are listening or watching Memorable Marketing by Media Group, at the end of the recording, I bring in Zane, who's the producer. He's the one who makes us both look nice and also sound nice, hopefully. And if there's any trouble with sound, blame him, not me. But I bring him in because it's always good to get his perspective on what he thought of this interview. So what are your things about with Robbin? What were you thinking?
As a layperson, I think this interview had two really big things for me. Firstly was the amount of work that goes into SEO. I think we've spoken about before, like what it is that SEO does and how it interacts with Google. But I think this was the first one where we actually dived into what it is to be like day-to-day dealing with SEO, how that works, and like just the writing, the rewriting, figuring out what content, what questions are being asked, reworking your content, and then the planning that goes into 6 months ahead, and then what goes into scaling if that works, what happens to scaling if it doesn't work. I think that is mind-boggling to me. But that's really, really something that I got out of this one is just, how much work there is involved with SEO and how, and obviously that reflects how important SEO is to every business and every website that works on the internet. And the second is tied in is really like really the speculation about what Google is doing and how we both please Google when Google won't tell us what they want, but also how we kind of shield our users from Google, so like that their experience isn't lessened because of changes on the Google front. So we have to kind of be, or websites have to be the intermediary between Google and the user, even though Google is also the intermediary between websites and the user. So it's a weird melting pot there.
It's a conflict of interest at best, and it's a monopoly and a big mountain, as Jeff Bezos says, and all the things that. It's very interesting in how they have to adapt, and you can't change them out, and you can't move them out. You just have to adapt. I like the analogy. I know he took it from Jeff Bezos, but I still think it's a very powerful analogy. I think one of the things that was interesting for me was, remember when we interviewed Julie a couple of episodes ago, and she said you can just test and learn, and she runs Facebook ads and PPC and Google ads, and you throw some money after it, some results comes back, and then, that worked, that didn't work. So right away, within a couple of days, a couple of weeks, they can test it right away. Whereas this is a long process with the SEO where you think you're going one direction and suddenly you go another direction. So for me, that was interesting how they're doing that. And I think he came up with some pretty good answer. That was my big takeaway from here.
Yeah.
What else?
Analyzing and scoping.
Yes.
Predicting.
Yes.
And
then, reading tea leaves, right?
Then having all the contingencies set up.
Yeah.
For whatever results you get back, and I think he did mention it very kind of tongue in cheek about it makes it easier to sell a particular strategy internally if you have this prediction of what's going to happen.
Yes.
But again, I guess where do you get those predictions from? And I guess that's again part of what you're relying on, both Google and people like Media Group, I guess, to kind of put those equations together and come up with an answer for you. Yeah.
And it was also interesting about the whole affiliates. Of course, if somebody is into crypto trading and they go to a website, they read an article, hey, you can use Saxo Bank or this comparison, and they click there, then of course they commission, and one can talk about that in more detail. But it's the whole outreach, the whole setting that up with all these people, and whole managing that whole thing is was also interesting for me. That a big bank, or even though they're not a bank, but a big corporation is doing that and have to rely on that. That was just interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I guess person to person interaction never really goes out of style. It just kind of the medium changes.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else?
Oh no! It was a long episode. There was a lot in there.
It was the longest so far, I think. Robbin, you're taking the prize if you listen to this, so you're currently number one. So please take that as an accomplishment.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was really interesting to see what SEO was like for a client. Yeah. I think that was really interesting. Yeah.
For me, that was about going deep. We could really go deep here, and Robbin certainly did. And so thank you to Robbin for doing that. So thank you. All right. Saying it's on to the next podcast. Can't wait.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Bye.